George Soros sits in the back row of an economics conference when a Nobel Prize winner calls his life's work pseudoscience. What happens in the next 2 minutes doesn't just defend an idea. It demolishes the foundation of modern economic theory and proves that the man who broke the Bank of England understands markets better than the academics who study them. Princeton University, October 1987, the annual conference on market theory. Grand ballroom of the faculty club, mahogany panels rising to vaulted ceilings, portraits of distinguished economists staring down from gilded frames. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over 200 of the most prominent minds in finance and economics. Nobel laureates, Federal Reserve governors, university department heads, hedge fund managers, the intellectual elite, who shape how the world thinks about money. George Soros enters quietly through the back door. 57 years old, wearing an understated charcoal suit. No flash, no entourage. He's worth $1.2 billion, but you wouldn't know it from looking at him. Grey hair, slightly disheveled, wire-rimmed glasses, the bearing of a philosophy professor rather than a financial titan. Most people in this room don't recognize him. He's famous on Wall Street, but this is academia. Different world, different currency. Here, reputation comes from publications, not profits. He takes a seat in the last row, notebook in hand, fountain pen ready. He's not here to be seen. He's here to learn, to test his ideas against the brightest minds in economics. Soros has been developing a theory for 20 years, calls it reflexivity. The idea that markets aren't rational, that participants' beliefs actually shape reality, that boom and bust cycles are self-fulfilling prophecies, driven by human psychology, not mathematical equilibrium. Wall Street made him rich using this theory, but academia dismisses it. Too messy, too philosophical, not mathematical enough for proper economic science. The keynote speaker takes the stage, Professor Robert Merton, soon to win the Nobel Prize in economics, tall, commanding presence, impeccable credentials, MIT, Harvard Business School. The father of modern options pricing theory, his work on derivatives revolutionized finance, turned gut feel trading into mathematical precision. When he speaks, people listen. Merton's lecture is titled Rational Markets and Efficient Pricing, Classic Efficient Market Hypothesis. The idea that markets process information perfectly, that prices always reflect true value, that arbitrage opportunities disappear instantly. Mathematics can predict market behavior because markets behave rationally. For 45 minutes, Merton builds his case. Elegant equations, statistical proofs, sophisticated models. He shows how rational actors, processing information efficiently, create stable equilibrium. Markets may fluctuate, but they always return to rational pricing. Psychology is noise, math is signal. The audience nods appreciatively. This is their world. Clean, rational, predictable. Economics as physics, market behavior as natural law. Then Merton shifts to critics of efficient market theory. Some practitioners, he says, voice dripping with academic disdain, claim markets are driven by psychology rather than fundamentals. They propose theories like reflexivity that suggest participant beliefs create market reality. He pauses, lets contempt settle over the room. This is pseudoscience. Economics is a rigorous discipline. We deal in mathematical proofs, not philosophical speculation. Markets are complex, but they're not mystical. They follow rules. Mathematical rules we can model and predict. Soros's pen stops moving. The words hang in the air like a slap. 20 years of thinking, testing, proving through real trades in real markets, dismissed as pseudoscience. Not debated, not challenged on evidence, simply dismissed. Reflexivity theory, Merton continues, appeals to those who can't accept that markets are more sophisticated than their intuition. It's the last refuge of traders who mistake luck for skill, correlation for causation. The room chuckles. Knowing smiles between academics, the unwashed masses of Wall Street, thinking they understand markets better than economists with PhDs. Soros sits motionless. His face reveals nothing, but something shifts behind those wire-rimmed glasses. Not anger, something colder. The calculation of a man who spent his teenage years surviving Nazi occupation by reading situations correctly, when mistakes meant death. During the Q&A, hands shoot up around the room. Graduate students asking theoretical questions, fellow professors debating model specifications, polite academic discourse, all staying within accepted paradigms. Soros raises his hand. The moderator scans the room, sees the unfamiliar face in the back row. Yes, you have a question? Soros stands slowly. George Soros. I run a hedge fund called Quantum. A few heads turn. Some recognize the name now. The eccentric Hungarian who made a fortune betting against currencies. Professor Merton, you say reflexivity is pseudoscience. I'd like to test that claim against recent market behavior. Are you familiar with my trade against sterling last month? Merton's brow furrows slightly. I don't follow individual trades, Mr. Soros. We deal with broader market patterns here. On September 16th, I borrowed $6.5 billion worth of British pounds and immediately sold them short. I bet $10 billion total that sterling would collapse. The room goes quiet. Those are staggering numbers, even by 1987 standards. The Bank of England spent $27 billion defending the pound that day. The entire financial establishment of the United Kingdom, backed by government authority, fought my position. Soros's voice remains calm, professorial. By evening, they capitulated. Sterling crashed. I made approximately $1 billion in 18 hours. According to your efficient market hypothesis, this should have been impossible. Merton shifts uncomfortably. Market anomalies occur. Short-term irrationality gets corrected. But, Professor, this wasn't irrational. It was perfectly rational, once you understand reflexivity. Now Soros begins to move, walking slowly toward the front of the room. Not aggressive, just purposeful. A teacher approaching the blackboard. I didn't break the Bank of England through superior information. Everyone had the same data. I broke them because I understood something they didn't. The pound's value wasn't determined by economic fundamentals. It was determined by the government's ability to defend it. He reaches the front row, stops. When I announced my position, other traders saw quantum betting against sterling. They knew my track record. They began shorting sterling themselves, not because of economic analysis, but because George Soros was doing it. The room is absolutely silent now. Even the professors taking notes have stopped writing. This created a feedback loop. More short selling meant more pressure on sterling. More pressure meant the Bank of England had to spend more reserves defending it. The more reserves they spent, the more obvious it became that the position was unsustainable. Soros turns to face Merton directly. The market participants' belief that sterling would fall actually caused sterling to fall. Their perception became reality. That, Professor Merton, is reflexivity. Merton tries to respond, but the pound was fundamentally overvalued. The European exchange rate mechanism was unsustainable given Britain's economic conditions. Exactly. Soros's voice sharp now, energized. But the fundamentals didn't determine the timing. Psychology did. If traders believed the government could defend the peg indefinitely, sterling might have survived another year. If they believed it was vulnerable, it could collapse in days. He gestures to the room. Your models assume rational actors processing information efficiently. But markets aren't populated by your mathematical actors. They're populated by humans. Humans who watch each other, who follow trends, who panic and get greedy and make decisions based on what they think other people are thinking. The Bank of England's traders weren't stupid. They understood the fundamentals as well as I did. But they were trapped in a reflexive loop. The more they defended, the more obvious their vulnerability became. The more obvious their vulnerability, the more traders attacked. Their own defensive actions created the conditions for their defeat. Merton tries to interrupt, but Soros continues, momentum building. You want mathematical proof? Here it is. $10 billion beats $27 billion when psychology amplifies leverage. One speculator defeats an entire central bank not through superior force, but through superior understanding of reflexive dynamics. He pauses, lets that sink in. Your efficient market hypothesis says this is impossible. Yet it happened, in front of the entire world, with billions of dollars at stake. That's not pseudoscience, Professor. That's empirical evidence that your theory is incomplete. The room erupts, not applause, but agitated conversation. Professors whispering urgently to each other, graduate students furiously scribbling notes. This isn't how academic conferences usually go. Merton's face has gone red. Mr. Soros, your example is anecdotal. Markets do occasionally experience temporary inefficiencies. That doesn't invalidate decades of rigorous academic research. Temporary inefficiency that lasted 18 hours and moved $34 billion. Soros's voice is gentle now, almost sympathetic. Professor, with respect, you're making my point for me. When reality contradicts your models, you call reality the anomaly. He turns to address the room. How many more anomalies will it take? The 1929 crash? The savings and loan crisis? The coming crisis in Japan? Every major market disruption follows the same pattern. Boom, driven by reflexive enthusiasm. Bust, driven by reflexive despair. Your models are beautiful, mathematically elegant, but they describe a world that doesn't exist. A world of perfectly rational actors, with perfect information making perfectly efficient decisions. That world exists only in your equations. Soros walks back toward his seat, then stops. I studied under Karl Popper at the London School of Economics. He taught me that theories must be falsifiable. They must make predictions that can be proven wrong. Your efficient market hypothesis makes specific predictions about how markets behave. September 16th falsified those predictions. If you were true scientists, you'd modify your theory to account for the evidence. Instead, you dismiss the evidence to preserve your theory. That, Professor Merton, is what pseudoscience actually looks like. The silence is deafening. 2 minutes of systematic demolition of the theoretical framework that underpins modern economics, not with insults or emotion, but with logic, evidence, and lived experience. Merton stands frozen at the podium. Around the room, some of the most distinguished economists in the world look uncomfortable. They built careers on models Soros just shredded with real-world evidence. One brave professor raises his hand. Mr. Soros, if markets are as irrational as you suggest, how do you predict their behavior? Soros smiles slightly. I don't predict market behavior. I understand market participants. I study how beliefs become self-fulfilling prophecies, how trends accelerate until they reach unsustainable extremes, how correction becomes overcorrection. The pound trade worked because I understood British psychology better than British economists did. I knew they would defend sterling until the cost became political suicide. I knew when they would break. Another professor, but without mathematical models, how do you quantify risk? Mathematics has its place, but mathematics without understanding human nature is incomplete. I quantify risk by understanding the forces that drive boom and bust cycles. By recognizing when markets become detached from reality. Your models treat market prices as information. I treat them as opinions. Opinions that influence reality, which influences opinions, which influences reality. That feedback loop is where the real money is made and lost. The moderator, clearly uncomfortable, tries to move things along. Perhaps we should return to Professor Merton's presentation. Soros nods graciously. Of course. I apologize for the interruption. I just wanted to provide some practical perspective on theoretical discussions. He returns to his seat, but the damage is done. For the rest of Merton's lecture, the audience seems distracted. The elegant mathematical proofs that seemed so convincing an hour ago now feel abstract, disconnected from the reality Soros described. During the break, clusters of professors gather around coffee tables, debating reflexivity theory. Some dismissive, some intrigued, all forced to grapple with evidence they can't easily explain away. A young graduate student approaches Soros. Mr. Soros, I've been studying market anomalies. Your theory explains patterns our models can't account for. How do I convince my thesis advisor? Soros hands him a business card. Don't convince him, prove it. Study the data from September 16th. Show him the timeline of events. Show him how psychology drove pricing, not fundamentals. Evidence speaks louder than argument. Years later, that graduate student becomes a prominent behavioral economist, part of a new generation that integrates psychology into financial models. The seeds of change planted in 2 minutes of confrontation. Merton never publicly acknowledges the challenge to his theories, but privately, his work begins incorporating more complexity, more acknowledgement of market psychology, not full acceptance of reflexivity, but recognition that purely rational models have limitations. In 1997, Merton's hedge fund, long-term capital management, nearly destroys the global financial system. A fund run by Nobel laureates using sophisticated mathematical models, brought down by precisely the kind of reflexive market dynamics Soros described. Markets don't behave rationally when everyone knows the Nobel Prize winners are in trouble. Soros later reflects, that day at Princeton wasn't about defending my theory, it was about challenging intellectual arrogance, about proving that real-world experience matters more than academic credentials. I didn't break the Bank of England by being smarter than British economists. I broke it by understanding something they refused to see. Markets are human institutions, not mathematical abstractions. The professors wanted to keep economics pure, mathematical, predictable, but reality is messy. Psychology matters, beliefs shape outcomes. Ignoring that doesn't make markets rational, it just makes economists irrelevant. The confrontation at Princeton becomes legendary in financial circles, not for its hostility, but for its substance. Two worldviews colliding, academic theory versus practical experience, mathematical elegance versus human reality. Soros proved something that day beyond reflexivity theory. He proved that wisdom comes from testing ideas against reality, not from defending ideas against evidence. Today, behavioral economics is a recognized field. Reflexivity is studied in graduate programs. The efficient market hypothesis still exists, but with acknowledged limitations. Change came slowly, but it came. Because sometimes it takes 2 minutes of uncomfortable truth to crack decades of comfortable assumptions. Sometimes the outsider with the Hungarian accent understands the system better than the insiders with the Nobel Prizes. George Soros didn't just make money from markets, he changed how we think about them. By refusing to let academics dismiss practical experience as pseudoscience. By proving that the real world is more complex than any model can capture. That's the power of intellectual courage. The willingness to stand up in a room full of experts and say, your theory is wrong, and here's the evidence. Not with anger, but with precision. Not with insults, but with facts. 2 minutes that changed economics. Because sometimes that's all it takes to prove the emperor has no clothes.